There's always plenty to talk about in the 30s, and not all of it economic or political by any means. Some stories even push the Depression off the front pages. They're queuing up by the hundreds at the courthouse in Flemington, where the all-American hero of the 1920s has been the tragic figure of the 30s. Charles A. Lindbergh, the Lone Eagle. Lucky Lindbergh. His wife, Anne, and the kidnapped killer of their son, Bruno Hauptmann. Once a German machine gunner and now on trial for his life in a drama whose unfolding has shocked and fascinated America and the world. The crime of the century. Now, all the fame of Lindbergh's solo flight to Paris and all the glory that it brought him has turned to ashes. Now, all that is left of his child is some tattered clothing exhibited to convict the child's killer. His name was Charles Augustus Lindbergh, Jr. To escape publicity and curiosity seekers, his parents had moved to an isolated estate in Hopewell, New Jersey. But the marauder came by night with a homemade ladder and stole the child away. Weeks later, after $50,000 in ransom had been paid in vain, the baby was found dead. One of the greatest American manhunts ended when Bruno Hauptmann was caught passing the ransom money, and the crime of the century became the trial of the century. Death House at Trenton, in 1936.
The National Broadcasting Company presents a special bulletin from the Press Radio News. Trenton, New Jersey. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was electrocuted at 8:47 tonight for the murder of the Lindbergh baby.
News, comedy, music. The golden age of radio.
But, Mr. Allen, it isn't a thing. This is an old friend of yours from the days of vaudeville.
If it's Otto the trained seal, throw him a fish and tell him I'm busy.
Now, wait a minute, Fred. If you'll just take your nose, that one you used to talk through, out of that microphone, you'll see that it's me.
Oh, Jack! Jack Benny. Well, wait a minute. There's a reception goes in there, folks.
That doesn't happen.
To hear another concert with the NBC Symphony Orchestra under its celebrated conductor, Arturo Toscanini.
Passenger flight from Frankfurt, Germany, the dirigible Hindenburg approaches its destination, Lakehurst, New Jersey.
The ship is no doubt bustling with activities we can see. Orders are shouted to the crew. The passengers are probably lining the windows looking down at the field ahead of them, getting their glimpse of the mooring mast. It's practically standing still now. They've roped out of the nose of the ship, and has been taken a hold up down on the field by a number of men. It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It burst into flames. Keep... Wait, get it started. It's flashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 20, 400 or 500 feet into the sky. It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers leaving around.
A time of tragedies, a time of changes, big ones and small. The birth rate has fallen, and women's skirts are lower, too. They're selling a lot more cars these days, and now the word is... Noontime is still lunchtime. But Americans, absorbed in what is happening in their to their own lives, begin to catch distant rumbles from beyond their borders. The world begins to press in on them as they go their familiar ways. Say, that's some story coming out of England. In England, too, crisis and change. The legendary Prince of Wales, who became Edward VIII, has abdicated. The crown that custom and tradition forced him to reject for the love of a twice-divorced American woman is passing to his younger brother, the Duke of York. Now there is a new king. The empire, shaken and split by the abdication, closes ranks behind George VI. Long live the king. Their Majesties, Queen Elizabeth and King George, with their daughters, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. A month later, at a villa in France, Edward, now Duke of Windsor, marries Wallace Warfield Simpson of Baltimore. In his abdication speech, he said, "I have found it impossible to discharge my duties as king as I should wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." What the American journalist H. Eldon calls the greatest story since the resurrection is over. At home, the neighborhood news is more humdrum. A letter from a son at a CCC camp, perhaps. The usual births, deaths, and marriages in the local paper. The weekly meeting of the afternoon discussion group on current events. And these days, goodness knows, there is much to discuss. Europe, it seems, isn't all romance and new-crowned kings. Only force rules, the dictator Hitler is telling the German people. Force is the first law. Defying the Treaty of Versailles, he sends his Nazi troops into the demilitarized Rhineland. Before the 30s are half over, all major international treaties are broken. According to Hitler, in eternal peace, mankind perishes. But when dictators begin to march, it is peace that begins to perish. We have buried the putrid corpse of liberty, the dictator Mussolini tells the Italian people. And he says, war alone puts the stamp of nobility upon the peoples who have the courage to face it. For the imperial glory of fascism, he has begun his own little war by sending his troops to conquer defenseless Ethiopia. To Geneva comes the Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, his country overrun, his people bombed and gassed, to address the League of Nations. I come to bear witness against the crime perpetrated against my people, and to give Europe warning of the doom that awaits it if it should bow before the accomplished fact. Italian aggression and gas have set humanity a test. Humanity fails the test. The Spanish agony begins. The civil war that ravages Spain divides the West as well. Some see in General Franco's revolt a crusade against godless communism. Others see in it only the spread of fascism and dictatorship. On Franco's side, Nazi bombers and Italian troops. On the Republican side, Red volunteers and Soviet support. In between, the Spanish people. No communist, no fascist is Emperor Hirohito of Japan, but his faith is Bushido, the way of the warrior, and it too means aggression. His troops flood into China, ignore treaties and American protests. Says President Roosevelt, the peace, the freedom, and the security of 90% of the world is being jeopardized by the remaining 10%. A United States gunboat, the Panay, is attacked without cause or warning while on patrol on the Yangtze River. A sneak attack from the air. 2 American sailors die and more are wounded. But the Japanese apologize, and stateside reaction to the incident is mild. What was it that Philadelphia newspaper said when Japanese aggression began? The American people don't give a hoot in a rain barrel who controls North China. Here's how. Isn't this a lovely party? I finally finished Gone with the Wind. Have you seen the headlines? Maybe the communists are right at that. At least they want a united front against aggression. Yes, all we do is compromise and retreat. That's because Roosevelt is a fascist. Nonsense, he's a red. What's going to happen next? We don't know. We can't say. We're wondering. Oh, well, the world will keep until tomorrow. It's supper time. It is an increasingly urbanized and mechanized America with quickening pace and tempo in city life, in American living. It's a fast buck, try anything time, and millions give the Irish sweepstakes a whirl. And if you don't hit, there's always bank night at the movies. Nobody hits as big in the 30s as champion Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, even if the German Max Schmeling did beat him once. Louis may not know it, says Schmeling of their return bout, but deep down inside, he's afraid of me. Louis replies in round 1. A new kind of jazz, something called swing, and Benny Goodman is the king of it. It starts in the dance joints, jams the theaters, even raises the roof at classical Carnegie Hall. And with it comes a new breed of flaming youth, the jitterbug. Upheaval of the times, even the social register succumbs to new phenomena. Cafe society, the glamour girl, the candid camera. Those who have it spend it now that the panic seems to be past and a little boom seems to be on. They're saying you can't take it with you, so wake up and live. No vulgar jitterbugging here. No Big Apple, no Susie Q. But any evening, any day, you'll find us all doing the Lambeth Walk. Hoyt. And in the ballroom of the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, another party. The dignitaries of the New Deal gather for the traditional victory dinner that celebrates their triumph at the presidential polls. If Franklin Roosevelt's first term began at a time of crisis for the country, his second begins at a time of crisis for the New Deal. If his first 4 years were marked by controversy and contention, his second 4 start with a political bombshell that divides the nation and splits his own party. He attacks the Supreme Court.
And I defy anyone to read the opinions concerning the AAA, the Railroad Retirement Act, the National Recovery Act, the Guffey Coal Act, and the New York Minimum Wage Law, and tell us exactly what, if anything, we can do for the industrial worker in this session of the Congress with any reasonable certainty that what we do will not be nullified as unconstitutional. If we would keep faith with those who had faith in us, if we would make democracy succeed, I say we must act now.
The president calls on Congress to support his fight against what he terms the horse and buggy decisions of the Supreme Court. He asks that the court be liberalized by adding more and younger justices, calling his program court reform. But opponents denounce it as court packing. And Roosevelt suffers a jolting setback when his plan is decisively rejected. The New Deal honeymoon is over. But another major New Deal measure, sponsored by Senator Robert Wagner of New York, is unexpectedly approved by the Supreme Court, and new life is given to the American labor movement. Now, backed by the provisions of the Wagner Labor Relations Act, using it as their Magna Carta, the unions recruit millions of members in a nationwide drive for collective bargaining, the closed shop, higher wages, better working conditions. Strikes everywhere, in steel, oil, textiles. A surge of strikes. And a new kind of strike as well. Workers refuse to leave the automobile plants and hold them like fortresses, chanting, "When the boss won't talk, don't take a walk, sit down, sit down." Of civil war, resistance by management against the rising tide of organizing, defiance of court injunctions by labor, violence by pickets and police, a kind of civil war. Congress puts a ceiling over hours and a floor under wages. This does not abate the acute economic recession that the country now experiences, but the last great domestic conflict of the decade is over. Other parades in the 30s. American columns keeping cadence with their European counterparts. Here in the United States, the German-American Bund openly imitates the strut and slogans of the Nazi stormtroops. In the march of the totalitarians, in the spread of fascism and the lure of communism, some Americans see the wave of the future. Here, in Madison Square Garden, a public demonstration of how dictatorships deal with anyone who dares rise up and protest. Who would destroy democracy, there are also those who will defend it. For the first time in history, the King and Queen of England visit the United States, and Secretary of State Cordell Hull greets them in Washington. Their visit is an act of Anglo-American friendship. And goodwill friendships are rare. Germany has overrun Austria and Czechoslovakia. Italy has invaded Albania. Japan is extending her aggression in China. The year is 1939. The month is June. There is still time for a brief moment of joyous pomp and pageantry in a sullen world girding for war. Days grow short when you reach September. Trilon and Perisphere bravely symbolize the theme of the New York World's Fair, the world of tomorrow. But now, in the world of today, war has come, and Europe is already dark. The 30s are ending. Another era is passing. Through the fun and fantasy of the fair, something whispers, it is later than you think. The President has said, many voices are heard as we face a great decision. Comfort says, tarry a while. Opportunism says, this is a good spot. Timidity asks, how difficult is the road ahead? Shall we pause now and turn our back upon the road that lies ahead? Shall we call this the promised land? Or shall we continue on our way? For each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth.